afternoon. Good afternoon to the distinguished chief guest, Principal Sir, HOD Sir, and my fellow faculties and my dear students. Honestly speaking, you guys, a lot of you who attended the graduation ceremony in the morning, you might have heard a lot about Sir. But let me just tell you very honestly, this is not more than a privilege for us that we are attending a lecture by him. Coming from a backdrop where he has so many accolades on his name, from being famous in literally the country, out of the country, and all of these many accolades that he has collected throughout his architectural journey. I would just like to tell you one thing which I noticed the best was the one thing which I was able to notice, that rather than going through his write-up, what has been published on Google and all of these places, I prefer to go through your social media. And I realized one thing, that is one of the most personal, as well as even like a much more in-depth description about you, that how you prefer showcasing yourself. And I noticed that you see architecture in everything. One thing which I saw very prominently, even from something as like he conducts a particular event where he's doing interviews with these many famous personalities, and he calls it Tales of Two Cities. Even in the similar fashion, he is able to go ahead with different interdisciplinary thought processes and try to see architecture in that as well. So a person who is able to see so much about architecture in different fields and realities, I would really, really feel proud that we have him with us, and he's going to share a very strong example of what we call a vision to reality. So I would request Purohit sir, so please call sir on the dais.
The children of tomorrow shall remember our generation as the people who plotted arbitrary demarcations on our common planet, where people from different faiths live in incorruptible harmony. It is possible to breathe a new life in the city. It is possible to share common differences and learn to grow together. Cities can be on either ends of the globe, yet have a similar sense of lifestyle. Get ready to explore the tale of two cities. Be there and see what a wonderful event that was organized. I think it was a beautiful blessing ceremony, and I'm really happy to be here at your institute. It's a very, very charming campus that you all are here in. So I'm going to today take you through a quick journey of 5 decades of India's built environment, and this is actually also something which is you will see in a recent book that I co-authored, which is on 5 decades of India's built environment, and it is actually through the lenses of our own design practice. Since Mr. Kukreja, my father, started the design practice 5 decades ago, so I thought it would be interesting to capture that how transformations are happening in India and how they have shaped architecture, and vice versa as well. So this is the book which is capturing those 5 decades. And it starts from the 1970s, and then it moves on to, of course, contemporary times. And I think it's very important to realize, when you look through something like this, you realize that how much and at what pace India is changing. I don't think there's any other country in the world, other than perhaps China to some extent, which has gone through this kind of a transformation. And you all are part of this moment in history when this is the kind of transformation happening in India's built environment. So where do we begin the journey? There is a start point. We could go to Harappan and Mohenjo-daro civilizations, Indus Valley civilizations, or as we took the peg here, was about really looking at post-independence India. And for many of you, you might have heard tales from your grandparents of when the partition took place, when India gained independence. There was also a very tragic, very poignant moment in India's history, which was where the partition took place. And suddenly overnight, people didn't have a roof over their head. They had to suddenly migrate from one part of the country, which used to be one country, one part of the country to another, Pakistan to India or vice versa. So these are the images of that time, which was the largest of its kind human migration that had ever taken place in human civilization. So today we talk about migration happening in Europe, etc. But this is at another scale altogether. And suddenly there was so much. India was a bright, young, independent nation, but at the same time there was so much despair and despondency because people had been just completely rooted. So that what that did was that obviously for such a huge nation, such a large nation, the first 2 decades, I feel, 2.5 decades, was really not about what architectural styles or transformations were taking place. It was just basically about the basic fundamental human needs of fighting poverty, famine, floods, and homelessness which was there in the country. And the governments were actually at that time more focused on just providing food and shelter to people. And that's where the transformation started happening in India. Slowly but surely. So I'm going to start the journey really from the 1970s or early 1970 when our firm won this competition for the Jawaharlal Nehru University. This was about how you should, and in those campuses it was always that you had student housing on one side of the campus, faculty housing on another, and they were supposed to live their own lives and come together only in academic areas to learn and then go back. But JNU was a complete departure. JNU was about 10,000 students, but creating 16 clusters. And each cluster had 600 students and faculty housing next to them. Now, why that was done? That when students come into a university and they're living in a hostel away from their homes, the idea is that education should not be confined just to classrooms. You're learning from your teachers, interacting with them anytime, day or evening. So that idea of being able to coexist was a very different concept of learning which JNU's architecture, design or master plan sort of brought about. And till date, JNU is absolutely famous for that kind of education. So how can, in our climate, how you engage with the environment is also very, very important. Again, the play of shade and shadow is all what I think tropical architecture allows you to do. Then I moved to the next decade, which is the 80s. Now in 80s, what was so special? There was suddenly an awakening here about how cultural institutions of a certain kind needed to come into the country. So I'm showing you one project, which is actually a project designed for His Highness the Dalai Lama. And at that time in the 80s, Sikkim was an area which was actually foreigners were never allowed to go to Sikkim. And so the Dalai Lama approached Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and asked for, expressed this challenge that foreigners cannot visit the monasteries in Sikkim, so can we do something in Delhi? So this land was allotted right there in the heart of South Delhi to what the Dalai Lama wanted to recreate the Rumtek monastery of Sikkim. So we got to do this project. Now what's so special about it? It is about how you can be inspired by an architecture of a certain region, but how do you transpose it into another part of the country altogether? Now this architecture in Sikkim or in the mountains, you can understand being done, this detailing etc. with timber, but in Delhi you can't do this building in timber. So how do you do it in brick and concrete? How do you bring that craftsmanship? So for people from our firm went and spent time in Sikkim, and then there were 500 craftsmen who were brought from Sikkim who sat here and did this kind of workmanship. These projects that you see, I'm going to share with you today. One underlying thread that you're going to see is about how architecture is such a strong influence in culture. And India has such a repertoire of culture that the two are actually completely intertwined. And that I think is very important. That's a philosophy in our firm which is very important about contextual architecture. You cannot just pick up a pen and start drawing something which you might have seen on Insta or Pinterest or this or that. You need to first understand the bigger picture. That's what I think is responsible architecture all about. Here you see that kind of craftsmanship again being celebrated in another part of our country with another set of materials, yet bringing the flavor of what the client wanted. That message of when you enter this campus, you feel as if you are actually, in the monasteries of Northeast. So those kind of sketches, and this is a time in an era in the 80s when there were no AutoCAD drawings, no array commands, no copy paste. It was all hand drawings and then being given to the craftsmen who had to create all this with their skill and handwork here in Delhi. I moved to a very important time in India. As you all know, 1991 was a big change in India when suddenly India opened to the world, globalization, liberalization, all that happened. So how did that influence architecture? Was it only that these words were there in India's economy, or did they do something to our building industry? I think they made a huge impact on our building industry. Suddenly, for architects, the world had opened up. We had a palette of materials, technologies, exposure, and when I say we, it's not just architect, it's society. The clients were looking at that kind of work which they saw around the world, and what they wanted then was, one of the fashions which came into India at that time was suddenly glass buildings. So you have all these architectural gymnastics in glass and metal starting to happen across high-tech city in Hyderabad and here and there in different parts of the country. But it was at that point also for us very important that how to bring about still in high-rise modern construction the feel and look of Indian architecture. So here was this building which was designed called Ambadeep in the heart of Connaught Place, which typically if you go to Connaught Place you have the Connaught Circus, but then outside all these post-independent buildings which came up called modern architecture, which are really actually orthogonal volumes, just blocks sitting there where every developer picked up a piece of land, wanted the maximum FSI to be achieved, and therefore you have those best efficient rectangular volumes in orthogonal volumes or shapes. So here was a departure that you have two crossroads of the city. Does it have a laser pointer also? I will take a chance. Yeah, which one? Okay, thank you. So let me explain it here. This is a high-rise building, Ambadeep Tower. These are two major roads of Delhi. So at the intersection, this is a corner plot. So the idea here was that that volume of building that you see could have been sitting here, and it would have been again another orthogonal volume, this tower. But the idea became that let's give some public space to the citizen and therefore remove this FSI and take it up there. And then this massing that you see of the building is all actually a derivative of statutory norms. Can you believe it? That whenever there are fire terraces required, these become the fire refuge areas, and that's how the architecture comes out. Another very important element that Delhi is a very green city. Like I'm seeing Nagpur, Delhi is also very green. But when you move around in Delhi on the street level, you'll never believe me. But the moment you go, let's say 4 or 5 stories above, you'll always see a green canopy of trees. So many times, most people living in a city, they are born and they die, but they never get to see their city from elevated level. So here was again a departure that how about creating glass elevators? Probably one of the first times that came into India, glass elevators were put on this building so that if anybody is visiting this building to meet someone, you take that glass elevator and you suddenly feel and see your city from a completely different perspective and appreciate your city from another vantage point altogether. And then this whole building, at that time amongst the tallest in Delhi, was all composed of 1 inch by 1 inch glass mosaic tiles. So this entire pattern, it's about bringing art into the city. Like I mentioned in the morning that for us architects, the world is a canvas, so you can do what you wish to do. So here is a canvas, literally that the facade of the building is a canvas, and let's create art out of it so that even the common man learns to appreciate and enjoy art. And that's the story of how this volumetric dispensation has happened. That would have been the typical FSI. You release the volume there, you create a public plaza, you create more public facilities at the ground level, retail, etc. And then the massing becomes such that you create these kind of terraces and you open the ground level. I move on to another decade here, now the new millennium. And the new millennium became about, again rediscovering our roots. There was a lot of talk about that. How did we go about it? We got this opportunity to participate in a national competition for a university, a large university on the outskirts of Delhi, and this was called Gautam Buddha University. So now the first time I visited this site, I was amazed. It was 500 acres of land, but not even a single tree on the site. Just flat, arid land in Greater Noida. You need to do something with it is what I told myself. And we created this master plan for the 500 acres, and this is along the Yamuna Expressway. So I thought the most important thing is that when you enter an academic environment, like when I came into your campus, the double height space, the entry, and then through that you can see the courtyard behind where you have your amphitheater, it just starts giving a different feeling. Actually, if you step back, the entry into the campus only makes you feel that you're coming into a nice, intimate, creative space. The same way here, I thought that when you enter an academic environment, leaving the hustle bustle of a city, you need your mind to it needs a few moments to change. Psychologically, you need to get into a different feel or space. So we created a large urban forest. Today, this campus, from being a single treeless campus, has more than 50,000 trees which have been planted here. And what I did here was that I thought, what is the first image that comes to our mind when we think of Lord Buddha? I thought it's this image. In Buddha, in his meditation posture. So where the head of Buddha is, we planned the library building. Where the body of Buddha is, we planned academic schools. And at the feet is the administration. And these are all hostels for 5,000 students, and this is 500 faculty, sports areas, etc., all bringing them together, and that's how the campus comes together. I'm not going to go more into detail because we do have a little shortage of time, but there is about evoking a certain sense of Buddhist architecture, and at the same time, it is also about integrating landscape and other art elements. So we have a sculpture of Mahatma Bodhi right there in the center of the campus, and there's a big magnificent lake which has been created here because I mentioned the site was flat. We didn't want all that water runoff to go out there in the outside drains. So we collected all that water and created a magnificent lake here, and then these are sort of colonnades which connect the different schools that are there. So these are the colonnades which are connecting school buildings which are all behind this. Why and how did this come about? This is a jali, and the inspiration of the jali design is not a typical geometric flower pattern or geometry, but it's actually the Buddhist text. So we took the Buddhist text and we abstracted the design of the text or the letters of the text, and we created the pattern of the jali. And why this jali also came about? Interesting story, because the CEO of this, our client, an IAS officer, told me that, look, can you make a campus where you don't give any windows in the buildings? I said, no, that's a little unusual. How can I create a campus of classrooms without windows? I said, but why would you ask for that? He said, because UP mein na, there are a lot of students are very rough and tough, and they go on strikes very often, not like how docile you all are looking, so civilized. So जैसी strike होती है, वो सारी खिड़कियों के पत्थर से they break the glass. So therefore, don't give me windows. That's not the way you can create architecture. So we said, don't worry. We'll do it in such a fashion that you are going to have protection to the windows. So in that sense, this becomes like a second skin to the campus. I also want to mention another very special project for me, Pathways World School. Gautam Buddha University went on to be selected amongst the 10 best designed university campuses in the world. And that's the only university from India which is there. So it's very special in that way. And this is Pathways School, which was also very, very special. Again, where you will see some elements of art and sculpture, how they become part of the campus. So, and these were things I saw lying around on the campus. Why? Because the owner of this project, he used to export, these old, they were not antiques, but antique-looking things he used to export. And so they were all lying around on this campus. I said, no, don't remove them. We will integrate into the campus. And my thought for doing that was that I feel when we travel around the world, I've been talking with your faculty, how we look at cities, European cities and other cities where, there's a lot of art, sculpture. You go to Paris, London, everywhere there are sculptures. In Indian cities, they tend to be vandalized sometimes, or most times I would say. And I think the problem is that from childhood, we are not inculcated that feeling of appreciation of civic sense and appreciation of art. So by doing this, I thought you don't just sit and learn about art in a classroom like this or in an auditorium like this, but if you keep walking past on this corridor every day with works of art, somewhere subconsciously you start appreciating it and respecting it. So that's why they are all over the campus. And also, a very special thing we did here was, again, we created a lake here. And this reason for this lake was that there was a big depression in the middle. And I said, no, we are not going to fill it, but actually preserve and conserve all the water on the side and create a water body. The other reason for it was that as per our National Building Code, and this I want you students to understand carefully, because a lot of times we architect things, bylaws, they are restricting my creativity. Now we did something here. When we were designing it, I was told that we need, as per National Building Code, a 2 lakh litre water tank for fire reservoir, fire tank. And I said, but building it on a rocky mountain, creating a tank is quite an expensive proposition. And the worst part, this is such a remote site that you can't even have a truck, fire truck, God forbid there's an emergency, reach here. वो आ ही नहीं सकता ऊपर because the slopes are so steep. Then what is that reservoir for? It will only have lizards and reptiles and all of that, and water will be unused. So we took a special process and permissions from local authorities that we will give an undertaking, the client gave an undertaking that there will be a 2 lakh litre water tank which will be given, but not a tank, it will be a lake. And that's how this lake came about, and it becomes such a beautiful feature of the campus. And the design of the lake was all the broken tiles that were there on the campus. They were utilized, and we involved village women from the village which was on the foothills of this hill to create their rangoli patterns. And they created the patterns which we then transposed here into this larger scale. And they got money and they got a sense of empowerment that they have participated in it. The men folk were doing the construction, but the women folk also got some employment out of it. So these are just opportunities that we need to, as architects, sometimes create. So that's the bird's eye view of this place, and that's the lake in the middle that you see sort of really in a way standing out and being the USP. And there are so many film shootings that have happened on this campus now since then. And now I'm moving to more recent times. And this is, many times I hear, because we do a lot of projects for the government. So people say, oh, you work for the government, you are not such a cool architect, the cool ones do other kind of stuff. Or they say, arey, government buildings so itni boring hoti hai, uninspiring hoti hai, they can never be creative. So here we created the new Secretariat of Vallabh Bhavan, Madhya Pradesh, and this is a very beautiful site because on the axis, like Central Vista in a way, on the axis is Charles Corrier's Vidhan Sabha in Bhopal, and then this is what, and there used to be an old Secretariat building, which is this one right here at the back, and a small one, and then we had to create this mega 1 million square feet facility. So we were told that, this building ka facade chupa do, kuch kar do. I said, no, why chupa? Let's keep that intact as well. So we've created 2 such wings, one here, one on this side, and celebrating the old Vallabh Bhavan element, rather than trying to hide it. And I think everything together is a nice ensemble the way it fits now. And this is the building, and it's gone on to be selected as the best designed, again, government building in Asia. So that's the kind of... thank you so much, but my idea is not to, get that accolade. I really appreciate it though. But the idea is that, where there's a will, there's a way. And that's what I want young architects to understand, that don't be despondent. And if we think positive things happen. We could have gone about it, just thinking of this. So there you see, that's the old Vallabh Bhavan, and we created these 2 wings rather than trying to hide, like some bureaucrats were suggesting. आप इसके आगे कुछ बना देना, वो नहीं हमने देखना. I said, why would you do that? You can't dismiss architecture so easily. So that's how this has come up, and what I call these are the 4 beacons of democracy. So we created these elements soaring into the sky, because this is located on the Arera Hills in Bhopal, for any of you who've been there. So you can see this building from very far in Bhopal, all over the city. You can see this building. So these are the beacons of democracy in a way, I thought, which would create and give this new feel. And you can see how the colonnades, the play, some inspirations from Charles Corrier's work, where he plays with these pergolas, and we also do that a lot with the terraces that are created, so that semi-outdoor spaces, the stepping volumes that you see, recessed windows in a certain rhythm. This is inspired by Buddhist architecture from Sanchi. So the porch, rather than just being a porch which is sticking out of a building, it becomes a very defining element. It has a sense of gravity, it has a sense of arrival. Look at the scale of the porch. When you enter here, you suddenly feel a sense of awe of arriving at an important institutional building. You can see the play of volumes, play of mass and void, which always I think is so exciting. These are the connections, sorry. We'll continue further. Now this is India's first transit-oriented development project. You must have heard of TOD policies and TOD things happening now. So this is one of the first projects of its kind. It also has what is being considered amongst the tallest buildings in North India, in Delhi. And what I did in this project, which I thought was important, again, looking at a context from a larger side. So we were told this is a project of DDA. You know, in Delhi, typically FSIs or FARs are not as high as you see in Mumbai, etc. They used to be 1, 1.5 or 2. Here now it had to be 4.5. So the client said, make high density, that is what TOD is about, etc. We zoomed out and we looked at the big picture that I mentioned about Delhi being so green. And in places like South Delhi, if you've ever visited, there's Lodi Gardens and Nehru Park and all these beautiful parks, India Gate, But you go to East Delhi and there are no public parks there, and it's a huge population which lives in East Delhi. So we thought, okay, we need to do high density here, no problem, but what do we give to the citizens of East Delhi and not just to this project? And we thought, let's create a large 10 acres of park which will become a public park for this entire part of the city. And in a sense, that's the gesture at an urban design level of giving back to the city. It had its issues, it needed convincing, but fortunately, the government or the bureaucrats understood that there is a value to it. And that's how now it is coming up. So sometimes we need to think out of the box. A design brief is only a design brief as much as you want to read into it or you want to read from outside it. So I'm just going to quickly this is a small video of how the design has been created. So these are two metro lines. The two noodles that you see in white are two existing elevated metro lines which are running, cutting across the site. So rather than doing a gridiron pattern, we had this big interchange station in the middle of the site, more or less middle, I mean. So we thought, let's create that as the hub. And this is like literally lilies coming out of a pond, lotus stems coming out of a pond, and creating this kind of a model of different clusters. So those are the two metro lines. That's the big interchange station, created a big plaza there, and the big park in the middle. And then it's all about an organic density. So very, very high rise, right? This is, in the proposal, it was 100 stories, 50 stories, very tall building, but still a large park in the middle, and creating, walk to work concept, bicycle tracks which are there, and retail at the bottom, mixed use. So retail at the bottom, offices, and then housing. It's a mixed use concept which in the last few decades had completely gone missing from Delhi. Courtyards in the middle and things like that. So that's how, so it's modern and yet it has flavors. I'm not getting into the cultural connotations in the project, but there's a lot that's happening here. But it's a new way of thinking of how you look at high density. And now, one project which is very prestigious in India right now, the India International Convention and Exhibition Center. Some of the G20 meetings will take place here. So this is about how, I believe the audio is not working, so I'm going to go further. but how he took all different inspirations from across India to create this project which represents India in many, many ways. It is the face of India in so many ways, because people who will land at the T3 airport in Delhi, this is going to be the biggest, much larger than, actually more than 2 times of Pragati Maidan is the scale of this project, which has mega convention halls. This is a retractable roof over an indoor arena. So when our Prime Minister went to New York to Madison Square Gardens, when he came back, he said he wanted something similar like that. So I was asked to create an indoor arena. But I said, in a climate like Delhi, why have a permanent roof? And fortunately, the client was very receptive to the idea. The moment I talked about, some people in the team said, "Arey, pani leak karega, ye hoga, wo hoga." But the main client, Mr. Amitabh Kant, immediately got this idea and said, why not? And this building now, so there will be rock concerts here, public speeches, tennis matches, all of that, because it's a multi-purpose hall that's been, arena which has been created. And look at the scale of the project. That's the arena for 20,000 people. This is the world's 3rd largest convention center, already nearing finishing, with 10,000 capacity. And with the world's largest LED facade. These are exhibition halls, and can you imagine the size of these exhibition halls? One hall is the size of 4 soccer fields. So the structure that we do within our office, the spans are the largest ever done in India, which is 250 feet is the distance between two, so that even an airplane show can take place here. That's the largest LED facade ever done in the world. This is what we have created, the multimodal transport hub, so that the underground Delhi Metro will come here, metro line at the bottom, and then you use a monorail system which will take you around the complex. And again, making it a very vibrant public space. This is the centerpiece of those 5 exhibition halls that I talked about. And then I thought, I've always felt this, that whenever you land in any part of the city, last night I landed, Nagpur was too dark, so I don't know about Nagpur, but anywhere else I go in the country, I see one thing that binds us Indians, and that is Syntex tanks sitting on the roof of every building, wherever you go. So I said, that's not going to happen here. Now when people are landing at T3, they are entering our country, so many international flights come here. So when they land, even the roof that they see of these mega buildings should have art. So these are photovoltaic cells which have been created on the roof, again inspired by Rangoli patterns and artwork, so that at daytime and in the evening, both they look equally attractive. Last project, I think, which is the India Pavilion, which we designed at the World Expo in Dubai. Now this is a building which has another story altogether, and I'll tell you another day probably the details of it. But this is gone on to be selected amongst the top 3 design pavilions out of 190 which were there in the Dubai Expo. And the idea here was to create an architecture of mobility. So the facade that you saw was a facade which is a dynamic facade, because the theme of the expo was mobility and sustainability. So I could go on, but I know I have to keep this lecture short. I have to rush to the airport now. But this is just a glimpse of what is going on in India, and a glimpse from our lenses. Of course, there are architects across the country doing fantastic work, and all kinds of work, all kinds of different philosophies and directions. I think India is a place today in the world, the only place, if I may dare say so, where architecture has boundless opportunities. So even as students of art, and I've traveled literally around the world. Maybe there's another slide to show you, and let me show you this. When I say traveled around the world, I wish the audio was there, because that could have explained you. I don't know how many of you know that I recently hosted a television series called Tale of Two Cities. And as an urban designer, I went across the world and I met with presidents and prime ministers and mayors of some big cities in the world, like Melbourne and Washington DC and all of this, and created this program which is called Tale of Two Cities. And this is about really scratching the surface to discover the art and culture and so many commonalities that are there between cities in different parts of the world. So here I was with the president of Colombia, and I discussed with him the parallels between Bogota in Colombia, South America, and Ahmedabad in India. And this show has been, so I would invite you guys to watch it on YouTube. It's Tale of Two Cities with Dikshu Kukreja. And it's a show I'm very excited, it's very close to my heart, and it's received amazing response from all over the world. It was telecast in 180 countries around the world. So it's something where I'm just trying to say that look, as architects, boundless opportunities. I could be sitting and doing yet another project in the office, but that's not what we are meant to only do. We are doing all those projects which you saw, but I think as architects, we have many more things we could do. Fascinating time I had here. He's the Prime Minister of Tirana. He's also a fun guy. By the way, he's an artist. So you go and read on the net, you'll be amazed. He was earlier the mayor of Tirana, the capital city of Albania, and he went on to become then the Prime Minister. So 15 years he was the mayor, now third term of Prime Minister. He's so popular, and because he's an artist, look at how he's transformed the skyline, the city of Tirana, which was a communist country. So it had just those boring buildings, and he's gone and painted the whole town in all kinds of colors and art. So amazing. So I have this great interaction with him. He always reminds me that I must mention that he's also the tallest Prime Minister in the world. Because he's a former basketball player. Then I met another politician. Yeah, the President of Colombia, I just showed you. He was in a rock band. He was a singer, guitarist or something. So all these, I met the mayor of Mexico City, who was running for the presidency of Mexico country next year, and she is a Nobel laureate, and she won that IPCC Nobel Prize with Al Gore. So fabulous people, fabulous things happening. With Tirana, I compared Goa. With Mexico City, I compared Mumbai. So there are these fascinating, this is Claudia Sheinbaum, the mayor of Mexico City. So I went to Mexico, met with her, and it was an amazing experience. And they all, here it's difficult to meet our politicians, by the way. But here, the presidents, prime ministers giving a red carpet welcome, literally. The Prime Minister of Albania made me stay in his state guest house, and the works. This lady did the works in terms of hospitality. And all that not because of me, it's about our country at the end of the day. They are fascinated to know what's going on in India. So you guys are coming into this profession, like Professor Purohit mentioned today in the blessing ceremony. You are in a time and space today in the field of architecture where I don't think our country has ever been. So great opportunities for you. San Marino, the smallest, one of the oldest republics in the world, one of the smallest countries in the world, next to Vatican City. And the population of this country is, now I forget, but 34,000 people. And it's the oldest republic in the world. It's never been conquered. Napoleon came here to conquer it, and these guys were able to convince him, and he went back. He said, he said, no, I don't want to conquer you. In fact, you guys are so sweet, you want some more land? They said, no. If we become larger, then people will want to capture. Let us
a lot of gratitude from the students, even from the faculty members of our college. Furthering that gratitude, I would request Milind sir to please grace sir with the publications of our college.